Namaskar and welcome to StudyIQ IAS English. I am your host Rahul Saigaonker. Friends, how are you all? I hope that all of you are in good spirits. Today we are embarking upon a journey to understand the great debates. I'm quite sure by now you have deciphered the agenda, isn't it? It is said that a picture speaks thousand words. This is a picture of India's Constituent Assembly, and you can see here Jawaharlal Nehru addressing the Constituent Assembly. So today we are beginning a journey of understanding some of the greatest debates that took place in Constituent Assembly, which ultimately shaped India's political setup. Constituent Assembly debates are a very important source to understand India's political setup. It gives us the foundational values, foundational principles on which our forefathers debated extensively. For any democracy, debate, deliberation, and discussion are the bedrock, and all these can be seen from these classical debates. They give us not just the historical picture, but they take us or they bring us to reality till today. And you'll understand this from today's discussion. I'm quite sure you have plethora of doubts in your head. The first doubt is, sir, how will this great debate help me in my preparation? How am I going to use it for my answer writing? Constituent Assembly debates are a very rich source to open up the minds of our forefathers, that is the Constituent Assembly members. From this, you will enrich, you will refine your understanding of Indian polity. Each and every topic that we are going to discuss under the great debates is a potential mains topic for you. For instance, today's discussion is about the great debate, that is, which form of government would be relevant for Indian political setup. Should it be parliamentary form of government headed by a prime minister, or should it be a presidential form of government headed by the president itself? As I told you, Constituent Assembly debates are a rich source of understanding Indian foundational values. In today's discussion, you'll not just gather information to answer this question. Of course, in the first part, you will get similar kind of information that we have in many books. For instance, if you may be referring to Lakshmikant or D.D. Basu or any book, because this is a very simple kind of a question that we already know. Sir, what are the benefits of parliamentary form of government? What are the benefits of presidential form of government? And what are the demerits also? You must have already prepared that. I'll also be talking about that in the first part, say probably for 10 to 15 minutes in the beginning, so that it's a revision for you. But what I'm going to discuss is I'm going to give you different perspectives, different ideas of Constituent Assembly members and their debates for each and every topic that we are going to discuss. We are going to get diverse viewpoints. We are going to get a viewpoint which is connected to, say, a liberal idea, a viewpoint connected to, say, a leftist or a socialist idea, a viewpoint connected to feminist idea. We are going to discuss a topic from various dimensions, which is going to expand your horizons about that particular topic. And of course, if you're from political science or international relations, these Constituent Assembly debates and the references from Constituent Assembly members, they are a sine qua non for your answer writing, isn't it? So take benefit from this particular session. And if you have any feedback or if you have any suggestions, you can always reach out to me. I'll give you avenues to connect to me at the end of the discussion. So let's begin our first great debate, that is, which form of government should India go for? Now, this was one of the prime questions, because this is a fundamental question, right? For any political setup, for any Constituent Assembly, the first question is, what kind of government should we go for? Should we create a parliamentary form of government, or should we create a presidential form of government? Now, you must be thinking, sir, why we had these two concepts with us? Pardon me for that. Why we have these two concepts for us? See, we were ruled for almost 200 years by a so-called democracy, by a so-called parliamentary setup, which boasts of rule of law, but a colonizer, that is the United Kingdom, right? So United Kingdom was the one who introduced us to these ideas, parliamentary form of government. Now we have understood this by getting to know about the historical evolution or historical underpinnings of Indian Constitution. We have known about the Regulating Act of 1773, the different kinds of acts that followed that, the Pitt's India Act, you have Charter Acts, you have Indian Councils Act 1861, 1892, 1909, 1990, so many acts came. And all of them, they have influenced us, right? Yes. But if you look at the debates that took place, if you see the time period of Constituent Assembly, one of the first meetings of Constituent Assembly, it started in 1946, December 1946. But generally, whenever I teach the students, I say from 1947 to 1949 end. We took about 2 years, 11 months and 18 days to finalize our constitution. So overall, I generally say that discussion started from 1947. Most of these discussions, they took place between 1947 to 1949. Now, if you look at this particular time period, we had templates, isn't it? We were already exposed to parliamentary form of ideas by British, and we also had some of the templates in front of us. If you remember the great words of drafting committee chairman, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, he said that the Indian Constitution has been created after ransacking, I repeat, after ransacking whatever available constitutions were there in the world at that point of time. I hope you all know the meaning of ransacking. That means they literally ate up all the constitution. They got the idea from each and every constitution that was already present in the world at that point of time. So we had the templates. So it was bound to lead to debate, deliberation, discussion in the Constituent Assembly. So we zeroed in on two forms. Of course, even till today, we talk about two forms. And there is also something in the middle. We are not going to discuss about that a lot, but just let me tell you some ideas about that. For instance, there is a French concept, okay? You know about the French president, Emmanuel Macron, right? French concept is somewhere in middle. It's a semi-presidential system. You can find it in France. You can find it in, to certain extent, in Russia. I wouldn't call Russia per se, but you'll find it in Sri Lanka, France, etc. These are examples of semi-presidential, or I would say semi-prime ministerial kind of governments. We are not going to get into that semi-presidential discussion at all. I'm going to stick to what form of government we wanted, or how did we finalize on it. Okay, so let's get into the understanding. Now, what is the meaning of parliamentary form of government and presidential form of government? I know that you already know this, but bear with me for a few minutes so that I can give you the core idea here. All right, both of them are democracies. First of all, many people think that this is a democracy, this is not democracy. Both of them are democracies. Okay, democracy, in the great words of Abraham Lincoln, democracy is by the people, of the people, for the people, right? So both of them are democracies, but these are different forms of democratic governments. One is called parliamentary form of government. Why? Because in the parliamentary form of government, people, that means people, they will elect their representatives. People are going to elect. Now, currently, India's model, people will elect members of parliament. And amongst these MPs, so I am not going to elect or vote for prime minister directly. Do you get my point? When I vote for a person who is going to be my representative, who will be going to the parliament, Lok Sabha. Okay, so those people, those MPs will select a leader for themselves. And in a parliamentary form of government, there are two executive heads. Now, prime minister is the real executive. Prime minister is the real executive, or we can call them as chief executive. He is the real executive. Of course, we do have a president, but let's not get into that debate whether president has any real power or not. I wouldn't call Indian president to be a rubber stamp, but Indian president is a nominal head. They are not the real executive. They are the nominal executive. All the decisions are taken in their name, but they seldom have any power. Call it. So, in another words, or colloquially speaking, I can tell you, or I can discuss that prime ministerial form of government or presidential form of government, in short. Okay, so in a presidential form of government, this is also simple. What people will do, see, people will vote twice. You get the idea of presidential form of government. People will first vote for their MPs. Now, this is their legislature, and people will also vote for their president. I'm quite sure all of you are following United States of America. Recently, US elections took place. In November, the result came up. Donald Trump, for the second time, has become the President of United States of America. So a presidential form of government is the US government. In USA, these members of parliament, or they're members of, they call it members of Congress, they have a House of Representatives and they have Senate. People vote for them. Those are the legislators. They'll be making law. But there is also a direct election for executive. Now in India, I do not vote for prime minister. I do not vote for even president also. President is indirectly elected. So people will only vote for the representatives who are MPs, and these MPs amongst themselves, they will choose a prime minister. Of course, I am not going to get into technicality here, that in India, without being an MP, one can be a prime minister for 6 months, but within 6 months they have to become the member of parliament for sure. You know this idea. So fundamentally, this is the idea. So the debate is, should I go for a prime ministerial form of government or should I go for presidential form of government? Now, if you look at this, president and legislature, they are absolutely separate. So in any government form, you have three wings, that is the legislature, the executive and judiciary. So in a presidential form of government, you will find that legislature is completely separate. Executive, the head of executive is president. He can choose his own team. You know what Donald Trump is doing right now? He has chosen his own team. He has chosen an eccentric, mercurial personality, Elon Musk, to head Doge, Department of Government Efficiency. It can be done. Does Elon Musk need to be MP? No, he can be any person. But in India, in a parliamentary form of government, you will see that this legislature is connected with this executive. In fact, legislature gives us the executive. An executive, that means a council of ministers, the prime minister and council of ministers, they have to be members of legislature. Even if they are not, within 6 months, they have to become members of legislature. That's the idea. The meaning here is, in India, you do not have a strict separation of power. The concept of separation of power was given by Montesquieu. I hope all of you know that. Now, question comes up. Sir, what was the debate? We'll get to that later. But, sir, what are the pros and cons? Now, this is something that I have read. Sir, I have read this in Lakshmikant. I have read this in books. I know about this in general. I know that a parliamentary form of government, it leads to legislative accountability. Meaning, the executive is responsible towards the legislature. That means, Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers, they are answerable to the legislature. They are answerable to the parliament. You know that we ask questions, start questions, unstart questions. There is always a check on executive, right? We ask questions. What kind of foreign policy are you running? Why the decision on demonetization? What is happening on Manipur issue? We ask questions. When I say we, that means the members of parliament can ask questions. So there is always a legislative accountability. The Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers, they are responsible towards the legislature. What we have known this, and we have gone for accountability rather than conflict. Now in US, there can be a conflict between these two, but in India, there cannot be conflict per se between the executive and legislature, because the executive has majority there. Apart from that, it does prevent authoritarianism. We have known this, right? It tends to prevent authoritarianism because there is not one particular head, but we have a council of ministers, a group of ministers, and those group of ministers, they are to a certain extent legislatively or financially, they are controlled because questions can be asked to them by the legislature. Apart from that, familiarity for India. Now, this is a very important point. Familiarity. India was already familiar with these systems, so we went for it because for 200 odd years, the British apparently taught us the concept of white man's burden, right? So familiarity, Indians were familiar with it. So one of the ideas that we went with it because we knew it. Apart from that, there is flexibility and stability. Now, this stability is something you can question. Flexibility is there for sure. Now, what is the meaning of this stability? Because many people think stability and this instability, so they are reverse. No, they're not reverse exactly. Flexibility means a parliamentary form of government is flexible. The size of the Council of Ministers can change. If there is a possibility of unity government, a unity government can also be created. It leads to stability also to a certain extent, because if one government falls, there can be a ready alternate government. Ideally, that does not happen in India, but still, there is some semblance of flexibility and stability for sure. Apart from that, there is diverse representation. Now, this is a very unique point, a very important point. Okay, in a parliamentary form, I can have diverse representation in the executive, in the council of ministers. Why? Because I have to choose from members who are members of legislature, and there is diverse representation there. Now, with the 33% reservation that is coming for women, I think it is going to become much more diverse now, gender diverse as well. Apart from that, coalition management, I wouldn't call it very easier, but still, a coalition management, it does show diverse representation. All right. So a coalition management or managed government will lead to better discussion, better checks and balances in a parliamentary setup. So if you see the terms that are using better checks and balances, better responsibility, better accountability, these are some of the features of parliamentary form. And you are telling, sir, I know this. But why am I discussing this? Because I want you to connect this idea with the debates. Where did these points come from? These points were highlighted by the assembly members itself. On the other side, sir, what are the cons? What are the issues? It leads to political instability. Why? The government may fall. We have seen this during the coalition era, especially from 1989 to 2014, I can say. Government instability. All right, because those who do not have majority, the government falls. Lack of direct public mandate, this is one of the issues, because prime minister, who is the prime minister? Have I voted for the prime minister directly? No, I have not voted for prime minister directly. Who have I voted to? I have voted to MPs, and among them somebody has become prime minister. So it's not a direct mandate per se. Next, there can be dominance of prime minister. Absolutely, we have seen this era also. I would say from 1975 to 1977, the period of emergency where prime minister garnered so much of power that the prime minister subjugated almost all the wings of the government, and we saw one of the darkest periods in Indian political history, that is the emergency. Possibility is there. Weak separation of power, you do understand that, okay, judiciary is completely separate. They have made themselves independent, especially since the Kesavananda Bharati judgment. But if you look at the separation of power between legislature and executive, it is very weak, because the executive come from the legislature itself. Apart from that, there is a risk of frequent election. This is being highlighted by our own prime minister for many years now. The current prime minister, Narendra Modi, has been highlighting has been batting for an idea called simultaneous election, because India sees so many frequent election, be it the central election or state election. There are so many states which have elections at the central level also. I think we have not seen it for the past 20 odd years now, more than 20 years. But there was a time period when prime ministers changed like clothes, right? That we change in a day. Prime ministers used to change. Prime ministers changed in 1989, 1990, 91, 92, 96. Multiple prime ministers in 96, 97, right? H.D. Devegowda, I.K. Gujral. I can give you many examples, right? Apart from that, there can be delayed decision making. Why? Because it's a consensus-based idea. It's based on responsibility, accountability. The executive is answerable to legislature. So many times, consensus has to be built and decisions may be delayed. So these are some of the pros and cons of parliamentary form. And if you look at the cons of parliamentary form, they become the pros of presidential form. So we have pros of presidential form also, okay, and the pros of this become the cons for that. It's a reverse kind of an idea, right? I hope all of you know that the presidential form of government, it provides stable leadership, fixed leadership, isn't it? If you look at USA. Now, today Donald Trump is the president. Anything happens to Donald Trump, JD Vance will be president for the 4 years. At least in the sense, there will be fixed term. Donald Trump and JD Vance, president, vice president, 4 years. Stable leadership, they will be president, vice president. They'll continue for 4 years. So it gives a stable and a strong kind of leadership. Apart from that, there is a direct mandate. People have voted. So people voted. Be happy with that. Then there is clear separation of power. Absolute separation of power is there between judiciary, executive and legislature, because the president is not part of legislature. The president is not responsible for legislature. Of course, if president wants to get his ideas or his thoughts passed through legislature, he has to build some sort of consensus, okay? That is there. Apart from that, there is decisive decision making. Then that is quick decision making can be done. I'm quite sure you are seeing that in the last few months. I think the first 50 days of Donald Trump are over recently, and 50 days have been ripe with decisions. Some of them may be good, some of them may be extremely bad, but still, quick decision making is there. Right? He simply says, he calls the media and he says, okay, I'm signing an executive order. That's it. Quick decision making. But there are also some pitfalls. The first thing is risk of authoritarianism. President becoming completely authoritarian. To some extent, the idea of Donald Trump, whatever comes into his mind, he does it. So it can lead to authoritarianism. There can be legislative gridlock. Now, this we have seen during the previous tenure of Donald Trump as well. In US, there is always a possibility of breakdown of the government, because whatever is the agenda of president, if the legislature does not accept it, the legislature will not pass the budget. And if the budget is not passed, then the government is shut down. We have seen it, right? And it is purely for this reason, or I would say it is one of the major reasons that we did not go for presidential form, because presidential form, it leads to more and more conflict. United States of America and their political structures, they thrive on this conflict competition. We did not want conflict competition because India was a nascent country, an infant country in 1950, and we wanted legislature and executive to work together to build India. That is why we went for that. Apart from that, there is legislative accountability. Of course, there is a lack of legislative accountability for sure. Responsibility, accountability is very low there. Apart from that, spoil system for ministership. We do not have that. If I want to choose a minister, I have very limited pool from the members of parliament. But in a presidential system, you can choose your own ministers. It can be anybody. It can be your relatives as well. You know about the cabinet, or you know the ministers under Donald Trump. Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, he can choose anybody he wants, right? So there is a spoil system. Apart from that, it leads to rigid systems. It does not lead to flexibility. It leads to a lot of rigidity, and this rigidity, it leads to constant friction between the three wings of the government. Keeping judiciary apart, it consistently leads to friction between legislature and executive. Now you are thinking, sir, I have already read this. But question is, where did these points come from? These pointers, I want you to observe that. Where did these come from? These came from the debates. Now let's talk about the parliamentary debates, the great debates. In this, I am going to give you both sides of the story. Supporters of the parliamentary form of government, opposers of the parliamentary form of government. I'll bring you till today also from the perspective of this debate. First, let's talk about supporters. There are no prizes for guessing here. Who were these supporters? Who are the supporters here? One of the ardent supporters was first Prime Minister of India, that is Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru was an ardent supporter of parliamentary form of government. Again, it's a little strange. He batted for parliamentary form of government in the political setup, but he had a liking, or he had an inkling for Russian economic model for sure. That's why we went for 5-year plan. Okay, it's a little interesting idea that I wanted to highlight. Jawaharlal Nehru favored the British model of parliamentary democracy. He believed that what we need is, we need checks and we need accountability in the Indian system. Apart from that, Jawaharlal Nehru categorically highlighted that a presidential system, it leads, or it has a very high probability to turn into authoritarianism. If you look at the time period of 1949-50, we had templates before us, right? As I told you, there was UK, and I would say the acolytes of UK, or the followers of UK, whoever got freedom from United Kingdom. You can talk about UK, you can talk about Australia, Canada, later in India. We have all followed parliamentary form of government. But the Americas, that means Northern America and Southern America, there were many countries which followed presidential model, and especially in the Southern American continent and even in the Latin American regions, there were many countries which turned authoritarian. This is what was highlighted specifically by Jawaharlal Nehru. He suggested that we have seen a lot of dictatorship in Latin American countries, especially because of presidential form of government. Now, to put it in his words, what he said, we must beware of making any mechanical copies of foreign institutions. He said that we should not simply follow foreign institutions. If we talk about American form of government, by and large, they have been successful in some countries, but there have been failures also. He specifically mentioned, especially in Latin America, presidential governments have fallen into dictatorship. Apart from that, Jawaharlal Nehru also suggested that what we need is we need an executive which is responsible to the legislature on daily basis. They have to be answerable. So what we focused on, we focused more and more on accountability. What we focused more and more on answerability, responsibility. Similar kind of thought process can also be seen in the drafting committee chairman's ideas. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, he strongly supported parliamentary form. Why? Because he believed that presidential form of government can become authoritarian anytime. He specifically highlighted that in USA, the president is not bound to act on the air and advice of Council of Ministers. The president can do whatever they want. But in India, we do not want that setup. What we need in India is we need stability, we need responsibility, we need accountability, and we do not need conflict. So he suggested in India, the president of Indian Union should listen to the Council of Ministers. Now, this is what is your Article 74, isn't it? This is what is your Article 74. Apart from that, he also placed the idea of responsibility upon executive at the core of discussion. So what we see here, we do not want authoritarianism. We do not want a free hand to executive. What we want is executive being answerable, responsible towards the legislature, from ideas of Nehru and Ambedkar. There were some other supporters like Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer. Now, Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer was one of the members of drafting committee. Now, if you see the drafting committee, there were 7 members. If I'm not wrong, you do know that Babasaheb Ambedkar was the chairman. Apart from Babasaheb Ambedkar, there was K.M. Munshi. We'll be referring to him again and again. There was Muhammad Sadullah, there was N. Madhav Rao, and then there was T.T. Krishnamachari, Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, and Gopal Swami Iyengar. So these 7 members, they drafted the constitution, and he himself was a barrister. He's a lawyer, right? Now, Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, he highlighted that if we go for presidential form of government, it would lead to factionalism. A very interesting idea and a very shrewd observation. What he highlighted was, in a country like India, which has different caste, creed, religion, languages, I do not want a president from one particular or who represents, I do not want a president who particularly represents one particular facet of my country. Why? It leads to factionalism. And if you look at his words, in a country like India, with its immense diversity of castes, religions, languages, and regions, the introduction of directly elected president with full executive powers could lead to disastrous consequences. It would encourage factionalism and create deep divisions. What a great foresight, right? If you see, that is what is happening currently in the United States of America, isn't it? If you look at Donald Trump, people have voted for him, yes, but there is a lot of factionalism in US. The entire US society is divided now. There is MAGA versus the non-MAGA people, right? The supporters of Donald Trump, they want to make America great again. That is the MAGA people. And then there are Democrats. And it doesn't mean that Democrats do not want to make America great again, but there is a division for sure. It may not be specifically on caste, because you do not find it that much there, but I think there is a division for sure along racial lines. There is a division along gender lines. I think patriarchal ideas have become very prominent in USA now. You must have seen one of the debates or one of the developments recently. One of the senators using Mr. for a transgender MP, right? It was a her, it was a she, but he repeatedly called her Mr., right? So those kind of ideas, and we were already warned by great personalities like Iyer. And I think from Constituent Assembly perspective, there is a lot of focus, there is a lot of ideas when we talk about constitution, a lot of focus goes to Baba Sahib Ambedkar, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, but I think there are many other people, many other shining stars from Constituent Assembly who do not get their due credit for shaping our political system, and one of them is Mr. Iyer, Aladi Krishna Swamy Iyer. Very good thought, very great ideas. Okay, he suggested if we have a prime ministerial system, it would lead to harmony and it is better suited for our society. Next, another prominent supporter was K.M. Munshi. He was also one of the members of, if I'm not wrong, one of the members of drafting committee. You have ideas which he highlighted, that he pointed out that British parliamentary system, it worked effectively in Canada, Australia, South Africa. And he said that we are already familiar. See, we are not jumping into unknown. We are actually jumping into familiar conditions. It's not like parliamentary form of government is something new, something radical. It's not radical. We are not venturing into unknown waters, in the words of Munshi. We are not venturing into unknown waters by adopting parliamentary form. Parliamentary form has been success in countries like Canada, Australia. Presidential structures are much more complex, and he also highlighted that executive being answerable, it leads to stability, it leads to continuity, and it prevents authoritarianism for sure. So there were many proponents who batted for parliamentary form of government, and we all know what happened eventually. Many people highlight that whatever Ambedkar and Nehru had decided, that eventually became the constitution. It's not like that, but every dissenting voice, it contributes to making of the Indian constitution. Every voice, every idea, every thought in that debate is a rich vein of product for all of you to understand, to develop your thought process. All right. So these were some of the supporters. Now let's talk about the opposing idea. I wouldn't say opposing idea per se, but presidential forms supporters. Who are the supporters? There were very few takers for this presidential form of idea. And if you look at their debates, if you look at their arguments, they also have a lot of merit. And if you observe them very closely, they had great foresight. It's like they predicted something. Let me give you some of the supporters from presidential form. One of them being K.T. Shaw, and I'll be referring to K.T. Shaw again and again, because since we are in the lecture series of great debates, and this is going to be a lecture series, mind you, I'll be referring to K.T. Shah again and again, because K.T. Shah, Professor Shah, represents the socialist voice in Indian constitution debates. And most of the socialist ideas that we find, we can attribute it to his thought process, or he has contributed a lot towards that socialist flavor in Indian constitution. Now, what K.T. Shaw believed, he was one of the strong advocates of presidential form of government. He advocated that we need to have a president who's directly elected, and there has to be strict separation of power, very similar to United States of America. Now, what was his logic, or what was his thought process? He suggested that if executive is directly elected by the people, then he would be independent to run his own agenda. It leads to stability, it leads to efficiency. Now look at his pointers: stability and efficiency. What he highlighted is a parliamentary form of government is rather inefficient. It leads to delay and it leads to indecision. Many a times we have suffered because of this. Apart from this, moreover, listen to this carefully. Parliamentary model, if the ruling party has an overwhelming majority, I'm repeating this, if the ruling party has overwhelming majority, Prime Minister may exercise unchecked power. I want to highlight this particular thing again. Prime Minister may exercise unchecked power. And what it leads to? It leads to pure domination. What an idea by Shaw. It is like he predicted what is going to happen in 1970s, isn't it? It happened, right? This was something which was predicted. We saw concentration of power in the office of Prime Minister during Indira Gandhi's times, right from 1971. I would say right from the Kesavananda Bharati judgment, there has been a constant tussle between the executive and the judiciary. And we all saw how power was concentrated more and more with the Prime Minister. We saw a very dark and tumultuous period in Indian political history, 1975 to 77. The period of emergency. Why did it occur, or what was the reason behind it? It's this. Is this, right? Where Prime Minister exercising more and more power by undermining all the other institutions. So the dissenting voice, the dissenting idea, the supporters of presidential form of government. I'm not telling that we should go for presidential form of government, but what I want to highlight here is their thought process was such that it has given us such a rich debate. That is why we have these pointers in our books, right? You must have referred to many books, right? You talk about Granville Austin, you talk about, say, Lakshmikant, D.D. Basu, Subhash Kashyap, so many books. In every book, you'll find the same kind of arguments. Why? Because these are the precursors of those arguments. Another supporter was Hari Vishnu Kamat. We will be referring to H.V. Kamat also repeatedly. H.V. Kamat, another very important member. He supported the presidential form of government, again on the lines of American model. He feared that in India we'll see a lot of instability. And again, if you look at his words, he argued, if I'm not wrong, I think it was 1949, in a parliamentary system, words of Mr. Kamat, the executive stability is entirely dependent on the shifting sands of the legislative support. And if legislative support is not there, we will see weak, indecisive, and unstable governments. And ultimately, coalition governments shall collapse under this pressure. It is like he saw the future, isn't it? Mr. Kamat saw the future. This is what we saw from 1989 till 2014. This is what we saw. I wouldn't say 2014 per se, but maybe till 1999 for sure. But we have seen arm twisting by the coalition supporters in decision making of the Prime Minister. We can give so many examples right from 1989 to 1999, 2014. Continuously arm twisting by regional parties, especially. So this was what was highlighted, isn't it? So he suggested precedent or presidential form of government. It will be stable, no matter what the legislature will be. We might be looking at some sort of conflict, but it will be much more stable. So he batted for stability rather than accountability. All right. So he, say, K.T. Shaw, he highlighted that you'll see that Parliament would become merely rubber stamp. We have seen such scenarios also. So what we entered into, or ultimately what we decided, was the parliamentary form of government. What these debates show us is probably we needed some checks and balances to rectify the issues regarding the parliamentary form. There was one more member, one of the prominent members, first president of India, Babu Rajendra Prasad. I wouldn't say he was a supporter of presidential form of government, but he was first of all supporter of parliamentary form. I would say he stood somewhere in the middle. He supported the parliamentary system, but he was one of the first persons to show presidential activism. It was under his presidentship that the office of president was, I would say, the most activist. Why? Because he believed that there would be some situations where the president has to use their power. President should have their discretionary power to act. If the president is not given some amount of power, then it would simply mean that the president is a rubber stamp. Again, Rajendra Prasad, he suggested that I ultimately support accountability and stability rather than a presidential form of government. I support the prime ministerial form of government, but president has to be given some sort of power. All right, that was his idea, and we all know what happened eventually. In 1950, we got our constitution. We enforced that 26 January 1950, and we got our parliamentary form of government. And I'm not telling that parliamentary form of government is not good. It's good, right? It's good, but it has its own flaws, and we have all suffered because of those flaws right from last 75 years, in phases, in parts, maybe at some points because of indecisiveness of coalition governments, at some points where there is authoritarianism which creeped into office of prime ministers. So we have seen such ideas. What is the end point of this discussion? The end point is, again, not to choose, because right now I would say we believe in parliamentary form of government. We have parliamentary form of government. We cannot fundamentally alter it, but the ultimate conclusion is some kind of change is warranted. Maybe removing those flaws which are there with parliamentary form of government. So what happened later on? Sir, is this debate still relevant for us? Yes, I would say this debate is still relevant, but not to shift to presidential form of government, but rather to solve the problems. And this is what happened in the later years as well. Now, if you look at some of the developments that happened in the later years, especially during the times of emergency, there was one of the committees which was set up by Indira Gandhi government, Sardar Swaran Singh Committee. I'm quite sure all of you know about Sardar Swaran Singh Committee. One of the terms of reference of this committee was to look into this issue, whether India should shift to presidential form of government. And Sardar Swaran Singh Committee, it rejected the idea. It suggested that we should not shift to presidential form of government, that we should not move towards it, but maybe we can give some more powers to the president to as a check and balance on prime minister. Although this was the recommendation, or this was the idea, but something else happened. The very next year, in 1976, if you look at the changes that were brought by Indira Gandhi, these were the times of emergency. Indira Gandhi, she clipped the powers of president. In 1976, through the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, the Indira Gandhi government, they changed the nature of Article 74 of Indian Constitution, which deals with the relationship between president and the Council of Ministers. It was changed so that it was explicitly mentioned, president shall act. Always, president shall act with the advice of Council of Ministers. Note that it was not made for governors, but for the president only. But later on, when the Janata government came in 1977, the very next year, they passed the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, which is kind of a reversal of 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. Here, they did not give extraordinary power to the president, but they did give one veto. So president can send the advice tendered by the Council of Ministers once for reconsideration. However, if the Council of Ministers again recommend the same thing, the president is now bound to give their assent. So what happens if president does not give? That amounts to violation of constitution. It may lead to impeachment. That's the idea. Many people ask me, sir, can you give me an idea under Article 61? There is impeachment procedure of president. Sir, can you give me an example of the ground of president's impeachment? There is only one ground, violation of constitution, which has not been defined. But this can be violation, that the Council of Ministers have tendered their advice again and the president says no, because the constitution says you have only one veto. All right. Now, apart from that, if you look at some of the recent developments that have taken place in terms of what has happened, people have highlighted this, that we should probably move from parliamentary form of democracy, but it's not possible. I remember one of the interesting articles written by current MP from Kerala, Mr. English, that is Shashi Tharoor. Shashi Tharoor had highlighted an idea that why India should scrap the parliamentary democracy. In fact, he highlights this again and again, that the parliamentary form of democracy has its flaws, and in Indian scenario, the flaws have creeped in too much. They have led to frequent elections, they have led to policy paralysis, they have led to indecision, they have led to weak governments, and perhaps there is a need of change. Again, if you ask me, sir, can we shift to presidential form of government? No, as of now, no. Sir, why? Because if you read the Kesavananda Bharati judgment of 1973, parliamentary form of government has become part and parcel of the basic structure of Indian constitution. So to change it, I would say not exactly impossible, but a little improbable as of now. So there are some people who highlight that maybe we are moving towards it. We are moving towards a kind of presidential system, especially looking at the last 2 or 3 general elections, especially 2020, 2019. It was a kind of one personality versus another personality election, but those are all discussions from academic perspective. All right. So I hope you have gotten a good idea about what debates happen in Constituent Assembly. And again, let me conclude it on a right note. If you look at another concept, we also have in the later years, we also have some of the ideas from Sarkaria Commission and National Commission for Review of Working of Constitution. Sarkaria Commission in 1983, they also highlighted that we do not need to change the NCRWC under Justice N. Venkatachalaya. They also highlighted we don't need to change the parliamentary form of government, but they highlighted certain reforms. And I think to bring stability, reforms have come. One of the major reforms came in 1985 through the 52nd Constitutional Amendment Act, that is the anti-defection law. Under the anti-defection law, now we have some semblance of stability. I wouldn't call it good kind of stability, but still there is a semblance of stability because the political defections have slowly and steadily reduced, or they have come down. And some reforms like anti-defection law, coalition management, although this has not come, but the SR Bombay judgment, it does acts as a beacon for us in terms of coalition management. And improvement in parliamentary procedures, these are due. A lot of these changes are due still. We still look at issues when we talk about parliamentary decline in the parliamentary discussions, too many adjournments. So it's still Indian political setup under reforms. So the basic conclusion is parliamentary setup is good. Whatever issues are there with it, what we have discussed, we need to slowly and steadily rectify them. It's a work in progress, and please keep your eyes and ears open for any sort of changes in future as well. I hope that you have gained a good insight from this particular discussion, especially for political science and international relations students, in general also for general studies preparation. This discussion, or sir, the ideas of these great leaders, can I mention them in the answers? Yes, absolutely. Do I have to mention them verbatim? No, just the idea is also enough, because you need to bat from both the sides, or you need to give the content from both the sides and then conclude properly. I hope this this discussion has enriched your thought process for sure. So I'll see you again with the next great debate. Till then, stay safe, stick to your schedule, and please remember, if you have any queries, any doubts, or if you have any suggestions, or if you want to listen to some sort of debate, please let me know. You can reach out to me at this ID @RahulSai222. That's my Instagram ID. You can also follow me. This is my personal number as well. You can directly message me here on Telegram and WhatsApp. This is the Telegram channel that I host for UPSC civil services students. You can check it out. If you want, you can join as well. Thank you again for watching this. Jai Hind.